The twin moons of Celestra hung high in the velvet sky, casting a silver glow over the vast imperial city. From the towering spires of the grand palace to the bustling avenues below, the heart of the Celestran dynasty pulsed with anticipation. Tonight was not an ordinary night. A proclamation had been issued, one that would alter the course of the empire's history. Within the great hall, King Veridon IX stood atop the steps of his throne, his presence commanding. His sapphire robes shimmered beneath the ethereal light cascading from the stained-glass windows above. Every noble house of the empire had gathered, their jeweled garments a dazzling display of power and privilege. Whispers rippled through the crowd, a mixture of curiosity and dread. The king's decree had been unexpected, and even now, few could believe it. A court attendant stepped forward, his voice carrying through the vast chamber. By the will of His Majesty King Veridon IX, ruler of the Celestran Empire, guardian of the stellar accord, and keeper of the divine flame, a decision has been made to secure the future of our realm. The three royal princesses, Seraphina, Zyra, and Liara, shall each be wed to a human. Gasps filled the air, disbelief crackling like distant thunder. The idea was unthinkable. Humans, though intelligent, were a lesser species in the eyes of the Empire, primitive compared to Celestran refinement. To grant a human the honor of joining the royal family? It was an insult to generations of tradition. At the forefront of the hall, Princess Seraphina kept her expression unreadable. The eldest of the king's daughters, she had spent her life preparing for duty. Logic dictated that this was a political move, an act of necessity rather than preference. The empire faced external threats, and human alliances had grown valuable. Yet a marriage? A lifetime bond with a foreigner? Even she had difficulty swallowing the idea. To her left, Zyra clenched her fists. Her golden armor, a stark contrast to the flowing silks of the court, gleamed beneath the high chandeliers. Zyra was a warrior, a general in her own right. Of all the king's daughters, she was the one who rejected tradition the most, choosing battlefields over ballrooms. Her amber eyes burned with barely restrained fury. "This is madness," she muttered under her breath. "A human husband? I would rather die in combat." Liara, standing quietly beside her sisters, did not speak. The youngest princess, she possessed an air of serenity that masked her true thoughts. Her deep violet eyes, flecked with iridescent silver, reflected the shifting energies of the universe. As a seer, she had glimpsed the threads of fate before, but this had been hidden from her. That alone unsettled her more than the decree itself. The murmurs in the hall had grown into a roar. Protests from the noble houses, questions from the advisors. Even the military commanders exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Seraphina stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Father, may I ask, why a human?" King Veridon's gaze met hers, unwavering. "Because no other species can bring what we need. Celestra stands at the edge of war. Our enemies gather, watching for weakness. Alliances must be made, and the humans, though young in the grand scheme, have something we do not. Their adaptability, their relentless spirit, their unpredictability. It is precisely that which will ensure our survival." Zyra scoffed. "They are fragile. They are determined," the king countered. "And they are rising in power faster than any of our kind predicted." His eyes swept across the chamber. "A contest has already been held. A suitor has been chosen." The doors at the far end of the hall groaned open, and silence fell once more. A single figure stepped forward, his presence stark against the opulence of the court. He was clad in formal attire befitting the occasion, though its cut and fabric were unmistakably human. His posture was steady, his gaze unwavering as he approached the steps of the throne. Ethan Carter had not asked for this. He had not sought it. Yet here he was, standing before the most powerful ruler in the galaxy, facing the skeptical stares of hundreds of alien dignitaries. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but he refused to let it show. The selection process had been grueling, trials of intellect, physical prowess, and diplomacy. He had endured them all, outlasting competitors who were stronger, smarter, more politically connected. And now he was to wed a princess. He stopped before the king and bowed, the gesture practiced yet genuine. "Your Majesty." The king studied him for a long moment, as if assessing whether the decision had been a mistake. Finally, he inclined his head. "Ethan Carter, you have been deemed worthy of this honor. Do you accept the responsibility that comes with it?" Ethan could feel the weight of 100 eyes upon him. He could hear the whispers, the quiet condemnation of those who saw him as an outsider. He had been an outsider all his life. This was no different. He met the king's gaze. "I do." Behind him, the three princesses exchanged glances. Serafina remained composed, though her mind raced with calculations. He was calm under pressure. That was something, at least. Zyra's expression hardened further. She would not accept him. Not yet. Liara tilted her head, watching Ethan with silent curiosity. For the first time that evening, she saw something flicker in the unseen threads of fate. Something new, something uncertain. The moment passed. The king turned back to the assembled court. "Then it is done." The proclamation was sealed. The choice had been made. Yet even as the ceremony ended and the chamber emptied, one truth remained. This was only the beginning. The halls of the Celestran Palace were lined with intricate gold and silver filigree, their patterns shifting slightly with the ambient energy of the structure itself. The air was rich with the scent of foreign flowers, their bioluminescent petals casting soft glows along the corridors. It was a place of beauty, of elegance, but for Ethan Carter it was also a gilded cage. The moment the king's decree had been sealed, Ethan had been ushered into a new life, one filled with endless protocol, alien customs, and a growing sense of unease. The court's whispers had not stopped. He was watched, judged, analyzed by nobles who saw him as an anomaly rather than an asset. Even the servants, though polite, maintained a certain distance, as if uncertain whether he belonged here at all. His three future brides were no exception. Serafina remained professional, her interactions with him calculated and deliberate. She was polite but distant, speaking to him only when necessary. Zyra, on the other hand, made no effort to hide her disdain. She refused to acknowledge him in any meaningful way, and when she did, her words were laced with venom. Liara, the youngest, was more elusive. She observed him with quiet curiosity, her eyes distant, as if searching for something unseen. Ethan had been through rigorous training before. His past in human military intelligence had ensured that, but nothing could have prepared him for the trial set before him now. The first test came within days of the proclamation. The Trial of Honor, a ceremonial event where Ethan was required to stand before the Celestran High Council and defend his worthiness as a suitor. It was meant to test his intelligence, his knowledge of Celestran law, and his ability to navigate political discourse. He stood in the council chamber, its towering obsidian walls engraved with the histories of the empire. A ring of alien dignitaries sat in a half-circle before him, their eyes glowing in shades of blue, green, and violet. A counselor with deep crimson skin and a voice like grinding stone spoke first. "Ethan Carter of Earth, you claim the right to stand beside our princesses. What makes you believe you deserve such an honor?" Ethan met his gaze without hesitation. "I don't believe I deserve anything, but I do believe that alliances are forged through understanding, not entitlement. I'm here because I was chosen, and I intend to prove that choice was not a mistake." The room was silent for a moment before another voice, this one sharper, interjected. "You are human. Your species is young, untested in the vast reach of the cosmos. Why should we place our trust in one of your kind?" Ethan allowed himself a small, measured smile. "Because youth is not a weakness. It's potential. Humans adapt. We learn fast. And when we commit to something, we don't back down." Murmurs rippled through the council, some skeptical, others intrigued. Ethan could feel Serafina watching him from her place beside the king. He couldn't tell if she was impressed or simply studying him like a variable in an equation. One by one, the council members posed their challenges, forcing Ethan to think, to justify, to prove himself. He responded with logic where necessary, with passion when appropriate, and with the occasional bit of carefully placed humility. By the end, when the final question had been asked, the chamber fell into an expectant hush. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the lead counselor spoke. "You have answered well, Ethan Carter. You may proceed to the next trial." The trial of strength was a different kind of test. Ethan knew it was coming the moment he saw the training arena, its sand-carved floor marked with the remnants of past battles. Standing at the center was Zyra, her golden armor gleaming under the harsh light, twin energy blades humming in her hands. She smirked as he stepped forward. "Let's see if you can fight as well as you talk." Ethan exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders. He had trained in combat for years, but he wasn't delusional. Zyra was a warrior born. Stronger, faster, trained in techniques that no human had ever encountered. His only chance was to be smart, to fight differently. The moment the trial began, Zyra struck. She moved like a shadow, her blades slicing through the air with lethal precision. Ethan dodged the first strike, barely deflecting the second. His instincts screamed at him. She was holding back, testing him. He adjusted quickly, using his agility to evade rather than meet her power head-on. He shifted his stance, predicting her movements, looking for patterns. Zyra was aggressive, but predictable in her offense. Then he found an opening. Ducking beneath the horizontal slash, he pivoted and drove his elbow into her side. Not enough to injure, but enough to throw her off balance. For a fraction of a second, her eyes flashed with something other than contempt. Surprise. She recovered instantly, coming at him harder, but Ethan had made his point. He wasn't just a bystander in this world. The trial ended with him on the ground, Zyra's blade at his throat. But instead of the sneer he expected, she simply studied him before stepping back. "Not entirely useless," she muttered. Coming from her, it was almost a compliment. The final test was the trial of unity, a mission designed to test how well Ethan and the princesses could work together. They were taken to an off-world station, tasked with retrieving a stolen Celestran artifact. It should have been a straightforward mission. It wasn't. The moment they arrived, they walked into an ambush. A group of masked insurgents, their weapons trained on the team. Ethan barely had time to react before chaos erupted. Serafina immediately took command, issuing orders with calm precision. Zyra launched into battle, her blades carving through enemy ranks. Liara, standing at the center, extended her hands, manipulating the energy around them to create a protective barrier. Ethan found himself moving in sync with them, covering Serafina's blind spots, supporting Zyra's offensive, ensuring Liara remained shielded. The battle was intense, but together, they fought as one. By the time the last insurgent fell, the artifact secured, Ethan knew something had changed. Serafina looked at him, and for the first time, her expression softened. "You didn't hesitate." Zyra wiped her blade clean, nodding grudgingly. "Not bad." Liara simply smiled. "I see now why fate brought you here." But even as the trial concluded, a shadow loomed over them. That night, Ethan awoke to the sound of footsteps outside his chamber. He moved silently, pressing himself against the wall before peering around the corner. A figure in a dark cloak, slipping through the corridors, heading toward the royal wing. Ethan's pulse quickened. This wasn't over yet. Ethan moved quickly, keeping to the shadows as he followed the cloaked figure through the winding corridors of the palace. His mind raced with possibilities. An assassin? A spy? Someone who opposed the king's decree and sought to eliminate him or the princesses before the alliance could be solidified. The halls were quiet at this hour, the usual hum of palace activity reduced to the flickering torches that cast long, shifting shadows along the golden walls. The intruder moved with practiced ease, slipping past security checkpoints as if they had done this before. Ethan remained patient, waiting for the right moment to act. As the figure approached the royal wing, he saw them hesitate before reaching for a hidden blade strapped to their thigh. That was all the confirmation he needed. With measured precision, Ethan lunged, seizing the assailant's wrist before the weapon could be drawn. A sharp intake of breath was all the warning he got before they twisted, using the momentum to slam him against the wall. Pain shot through his back, but he recovered quickly, shifting his weight to throw the figure off balance. They tumbled to the ground in a blur of movement, Ethan pinning them beneath him before yanking back the hood. Zyra. Her amber eyes burned with fury as she struggled beneath him, but Ethan didn't release his hold. "You want to tell me why you're sneaking through the palace in the middle of the night with a blade?" he asked, keeping his voice low. She bared her teeth. "Get off me. Not until you start talking." With an irritated growl, she finally relented, though the tension in her body remained. "I wasn't going to use it. Not on you, not on my sisters." Ethan studied her, searching for deception. "Then what were you doing?" Zyra turned her head slightly, as if listening for unseen threats. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, more controlled. "Someone has been watching us. I noticed it during the trials. Small things, a presence lingering in the halls, a disturbance in the palace's energy fields. I thought if I caught them in the act, I could put an end to it myself." Ethan exhaled, his grip loosening. "You should have told me," she scoffed. "And why would I do that?" "Because you're not the only one who's noticed." Zyra stilled, her sharp gaze locking onto his. "You think it's an inside threat?" "I think we don't have enough information." He stood, offering her a hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. A flicker of something passed between them. Not quite trust, but not outright hostility either. The next morning, Serafina called for an emergency meeting in the royal chamber. Liara was already seated, her gaze distant, lost in the endless streams of fate only she could see. Ethan and Zyra entered together, an unspoken understanding lingering between them. Serafina wasted no time. "There was an attempted breach last night. Someone tried to gain access to the royal wing." Zyra folded her arms. "So it wasn't just my imagination." Serafina nodded. "I consulted our father's intelligence network. There have been whispers, movements in the outer sectors, encrypted messages intercepted by our forces. The timing is too convenient to be a coincidence." Ethan leaned forward. "What do we know?" Liara finally spoke, her voice soft but certain. "It is not just political opposition. There is something older at work here." The air in the room seemed to shift, a weight settling over them. Serafina frowned. "Explain." Liara's violet eyes darkened, as if she were seeing something beyond the present moment. "There are forces who do not wish to see this union succeed. Not just nobles or rival houses, but something far more ancient. I have seen glimpses in the threads of fate. A darkness stirs, waiting for its chance to strike." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He had spent his life dealing with war, with politics, with the brutality of human conflict. But this was something else entirely. Serafina inhaled deeply before turning back to the group. "Then we have no choice. We must be ready for whatever is coming." That night, the attack came. The palace trembled as explosions rocked the lower levels. Alarms blared, the once tranquil halls now filled with the sound of boots rushing toward battle. Ethan was already moving before he fully registered what was happening. He sprinted toward the royal wing, knowing the princesses were the primary target. Zyra was the first he found, already engaged in combat with a group of masked intruders. Her blades danced, slicing through armor and flesh with merciless efficiency. She didn't need his help, but that didn't mean he wouldn't fight beside her. Serafina was further down the hall, her hands glowing with energy as she activated the palace's defensive shields. Her expression was set, determined. She wasn't just a princess. She was a leader. Liara stood at the center of it all, her presence calm despite the chaos around her. Her fingers moved through the air, weaving unseen patterns that pulsed with power. The enemy forces hesitated, as if something unseen had unsettled them. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. Unlike the other intruders, this one radiated an unnatural presence. Their form was humanoid but wrong, their features shifting like a mirage. When they spoke, their voice was a discordant whisper, layered with voices not their own. "You should not have interfered." Ethan barely had time to react before the figure raised a hand. The shadows around them twisted, solidifying into a weapon that lashed out with impossible speed. He moved instinctively, dodging just as Zyra lunged to intercept the strike. Serafina unleashed a blast of energy, but the figure deflected it with ease. Liara's eyes widened in recognition. "It's them," she whispered. Ethan didn't have time to ask what she meant. The battle escalated, each moment more desperate than the last. The intruder was unlike anything they had faced before, powerful, relentless. And yet, as Ethan fought alongside the princesses, something shifted. For the first time, they weren't just individuals. They were a unit. Serafina's precision, Zyra's strength, Liara's foresight. Each of them complemented the others in ways that turned the tide. And Ethan? He was the unpredictable element, the one who didn't fight like a Celestran, who adapted, who found weaknesses where none should exist. Together, they forced the intruder back. The shadows recoiled, the figure hissing in frustration before vanishing into the void. The palace fell silent once more, the echoes of battle fading into the distant corridors. Ethan exhaled heavily, turning to the others. "Is everyone okay?" Serafina nodded, though her expression remained tense. "For now." Zyra wiped the blood from her blade, her gaze still fixed on the spot where the intruder had disappeared. That wasn't an ordinary enemy. Liara's voice was steady, but there was a new urgency in her tone. "No, and they will return." Ethan met her gaze, understanding the weight of her words. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was something bigger, something older, and it was far from over. The aftermath of the battle left the palace in uneasy silence. The corridors, once pristine, bore the scars of the assault's scorch marks from energy weapons, shattered pillars, and the bodies of fallen intruders being swiftly removed by the royal guard. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and something darker, something Ethan couldn't quite name. It lingered like a stain in the fabric of reality, a whisper of whatever force had tried to breach their world. Ethan stood near one of the shattered archways, scanning the remnants of the battle. His muscles ached, and his pulse still ran high from the fight. He wasn't alone. Zyra was beside him, her golden armor smeared with blood, her expression unreadable. Serafina stood at a distance, speaking in hushed but firm tones with her father's counselors, while Liara knelt on the marble floor, tracing invisible lines in the stone. "They're not done," she murmured, her violet eyes distant. Ethan turned to her. "What do you mean?" Liara's fingers hovered just above the cracks in the floor, as if feeling something beyond sight. "They weren't just testing our defenses. They were searching for something." Zyra let out a sharp breath. "Searching for what?" "The artifact we recovered." Liara shook her head. "No, something deeper. Something they believe is hidden within the palace itself." Ethan exchanged a glance with Serafina, who had just finished her conversation. She approached them, her expression grave. "Then we need to find it first." The next few hours were spent combing through the palace archives, searching for anything that might explain what the intruders had been after. The Celestran records were vast, stretching back millennia, detailing wars, alliances, and secrets buried beneath layers of time. Ethan sat before a series of ancient holographic projections, their luminescent symbols shifting as he scrolled through centuries of knowledge. Serafina stood nearby, her brows furrowed in concentration as she analyzed a separate set of documents. It was Liara who finally found something. "There," she whispered, her voice tinged with certainty. The others gathered around as she activated an ancient record. A three-dimensional projection flickered to life, an image of the palace as it had been eons ago, before expansions, before time had reshaped it. At the heart of the structure, beneath the throne room itself, lay a sealed chamber, a place forgotten by history. Serafina's breath hitched. "That chamber isn't on any of the modern schematics." Ethan studied the image. "Then whatever they were looking for, it's down there." Zyra cracked her knuckles. "Only one way to find out." They moved quickly, navigating through the hidden passageways beneath the palace. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, the walls shifting from polished marble to rough, untouched stone. It was clear that no one had ventured here in centuries. At last, they reached an enormous set of doors, engraved with symbols that pulsed faintly as they approached. Liara raised a hand, tracing one of the glowing patterns. The symbols reacted instantly, their light flaring before the doors groaned open, revealing the chamber beyond. The room was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood an ancient pedestal, and upon it, a sphere, swirling with an inner darkness that seemed to move of its own accord. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "What the hell is that?" Liara's voice was barely above a whisper. "The heart of the void." Serafina exhaled sharply. "It was supposed to be a myth." Zyra frowned. "I hate to break it to you, but myths don't tend to get people killed." Ethan stepped closer, studying the artifact. "What does it do?" Liara hesitated before answering. It was said to be a source of power, something ancient civilizations feared. Could consume energy, distort reality itself. The Celestran kings sealed it away to prevent it from ever being used. Ethan looked at Serafina. "If it's this dangerous, why not destroy it?" Her expression darkened. "Because some things cannot be destroyed, only contained." A sudden tremor shook the chamber, the very air warping as the shadows deepened. A voice, layered with the same discordant tones as the intruder from before, echoed around them. "You should not have come here." The darkness coalesced into a figure, its form shifting, undefined. It stepped forward, and though it had no face, Ethan could feel its gaze upon him. Serafina reacted instantly, raising her hands to summon a barrier, but the entity merely flicked a hand, shattering it as if it were glass. Zyra lunged, her blades cutting through empty air as the figure dissolved and reformed behind her. Ethan reached for his weapon, but the figure moved too quickly. In an instant, tendrils of darkness wrapped around his wrist, yanking him forward. The contact sent a jolt of cold through his veins, images flashing through his mind. Worlds consumed, stars extinguished, civilizations reduced to nothing. The entity leaned closer. "You do not belong here, human." Gritting his teeth, Ethan forced himself to move, twisting out of the entity's grip. "Yeah? Well, neither do you." Liara stepped forward, her eyes glowing as she raised both hands. The very air hummed with energy, the chamber responding to her presence. The heart of the void pulsed, its glow intensifying. The entity recoiled, its form flickering. "You cannot stop what has already begun." Serafina seized the moment. "Liara now." With a final surge of power, Liara directed the energy toward the heart. The artifact absorbed it, its darkness pulling inward before a shockwave erupted outward. The entity let out a sound that was not a scream but something deeper, something ancient, before vanishing into nothingness. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan exhaled, his hands still shaking. "Is it gone?" Liara nodded slowly. "For now." Serafina turned to the heart, its surface now dormant. "We need to ensure this stays buried." Zyra crossed her arms. "And we need to find out who else knows about it." Ethan glanced at the others. They had fought together, bled together, and now they stood on the precipice of something even greater. This wasn't just about a political alliance anymore. This was about survival, and he had a feeling their fight was far from over.